Here's a fact that might blow your mind: there are people who score 100% on English grammar tests but still freeze up in real conversations. Their brains are literally wired to fail at fluency, even when they know all the rules. This isn't just bad luck, it's neuroscience. And if you've ever felt stuck in intermediate purgatory, this might be why.
Wait, what? You're telling me someone can ace every grammar test but still sound like a robot in a conversation? That doesn't make sense. If they know the rules, why can't they just apply them? And more importantly, how is this even possible? Are we saying grammar doesn't matter at all?
It's not that grammar doesn't matter, it's that fluency isn't just about grammar. Your brain treats language like a two-lane highway. One lane is for rules and accuracy, and the other is for speed and instinct. Most learners only train the first lane, but fluency lives in the second. That's why you can know every rule but still hesitate when ordering coffee.
Okay, so if fluency isn't about grammar, what is it about? And why does my brain act like it's never heard of the word when I'm trying to speak? Is there a way to train this second lane, or are we just doomed to stumble forever?
Let's rewind to 2015, a quiet lab at the University of California, Berkeley. A team of neuroscientists led by Dr. Nina Dronkers was scanning the brains of bilingual speakers, trying to figure out why some people sound fluent while others don't. They weren't looking at grammar skills, they were looking at something far more interesting: how the brain processes language in real time.
I remember hearing about this study. Wasn't it the one where they found that fluent speakers use completely different parts of their brain than learners? But what exactly were they measuring? And how did they even define fluent in a way that a brain scan could capture?
They defined fluency as effortless, automatic speech with natural rhythm and intonation. Not grammar accuracy. They hooked participants up to fMRI machines and had them describe pictures in English. The fluent speakers' brains lit up in the basal ganglia and cerebellum areas associated with automatic motor skills, like riding a bike or playing an instrument. The non-fluent speakers? Their prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of the brain, was working overtime.
So you're saying fluent speakers aren't thinking about language, they're just doing it, like muscle memory? That's wild. But how does that even happen? Do our brains just magically switch from thinking mode to automatic mode one day, or is there a process we can hack?
It's not magic, it's repetition. But not just any repetition. Think about how you learned to drive. At first, you had to consciously think about every step: check the mirror, signal, brake, turn the wheel. But after enough practice, it became automatic. Language works the same way. The problem is, most learners practice in a way that keeps them stuck in thinking mode.
That makes sense, but I feel like I've repeated the same phrases a million times and I'm still not fluent. What's the difference between the repetition that works and the repetition that doesn't? And why do some people seem to pick up languages effortlessly while others struggle for years?
Let's go back to the early 2000s, when linguists started noticing something strange. They were studying immigrants in the US who had lived there for decades but still spoke broken English. Meanwhile, some international students who arrived just a few years earlier sounded almost native. The difference wasn't intelligence or effort, it was how they practiced. The fluent group wasn't memorizing grammar rules, they were absorbing whole phrases, like "how's it going?" or "I'll get back to you."
So it's not about learning words, it's about learning chunks of language? That's a game changer. But why didn't anyone tell us this sooner? It seems so obvious now that you say it. And how do we even start practicing this way if we've been doing it wrong for years?
The idea of chunking actually goes back to the 1950s, when psychologist George Miller discovered that our working memory can only hold about 7 items at a time. But linguists didn't apply this to language learning until the 1990s. Before that, language teaching was all about grammar drills and vocabulary lists. The shift happened when researchers realized that native speakers don't build sentences word by word, they pull from a mental library of pre-assembled chunks.
That's fascinating. So when I say something like "I don't know what you're talking about," I'm not piecing together each word, I'm pulling a single chunk from my brain? But how does that explain why some learners sound fluent while others don't? Is it just about memorizing more chunks?
It's not just about memorizing chunks, it's about how your brain stores them. In 2008, a team at the University of Edinburgh found that fluent speakers store chunks as single units in their mental lexicon, while learners store them as separate words. So when a learner says I don't know, their brain is actually processing three separate items: I, don't, and know. A fluent speaker processes it as one unit. That's why learners hesitate, their brains are doing 3 times the work.
That explains so much. But how do we train our brains to store chunks like fluent speakers? Is it just about repetition, or is there a smarter way? And what about grammar, do we just ignore it now? I feel like I've been wasting years on verb conjugations if chunks are all that matter.
Grammar isn't irrelevant, it's just not the focus. Think of it like learning to play piano. You don't start by memorizing music theory, you start by playing simple songs. Once your fingers know where to go, the theory makes sense. Language is the same. The turning point for most learners is when they stop translating word by word and start thinking in chunks. That's when fluency begins to feel automatic.
Okay, but how do we actually do that? If I'm learning English, should I just stop studying grammar and start memorizing phrases? And how many chunks do I need to know before I start sounding fluent? Is there a magic number, or is it more about how I use them?
There's no magic number, but research suggests that knowing about 500 high-frequency chunks can cover 80% of everyday conversation. The key is to learn them in context, not in isolation. For example, instead of memorizing get as a verb, you learn get up, get dressed, get home. The breakthrough moment for most learners is when they realize they can combine chunks on the fly. That's when they stop sounding like a textbook and start sounding like a person.
That's a huge shift in mindset. But what about people who learn through immersion? Do they pick up chunks naturally, or do they still need to consciously practice them? And how does this explain why some people in immersion environments still struggle with fluency?
Immersion helps, but it's not enough. In 2016, a study at Georgetown University tracked international students in the US for a year. The ones who improved the most weren't the ones who spent the most time speaking, they were the ones who listened the most. Specifically, they listened for chunks. They'd hear a phrase like out of the blue, and instead of translating it word by word, they'd absorb it as a single unit. The students who tried to translate everything stayed stuck in thinking mode.
That's so counterintuitive. I always assumed speaking was the key to fluency, but you're saying listening is just as important, maybe even more so? But how do we listen for chunks? Is it something we can practice, or do we just have to hope our brains pick them up naturally?
You can absolutely practice it. The method is called shadowing, and it's been around since the 1970s. You listen to a native speaker and repeat what they say immediately after them, matching their rhythm and intonation. The goal isn't to memorize the words, it's to train your brain to process language in chunks. A 2019 study in Japan found that learners who shadowed for just 15 minutes a day improved their fluency twice as fast as those who didn't.
Shadowing sounds simple, but I can see how it would force your brain to stop translating. But what about people who don't have access to native speakers? Can they still use this technique with podcasts or TV shows? And does it work for all languages, or is English somehow different?
It works for any language, and you don't need a native speaker. You can shadow TV shows, podcasts, or even audiobooks. The key is to choose material that's slightly above your level, challenging but not overwhelming. English is actually a great language for chunking because it's full of fixed phrases like on the other hand or at the end of the day. These phrases act like training wheels for fluency. The more you hear them, the more your brain starts to recognize them as single units.
That's a relief. But what about people who feel like they're stuck in a plateau? They've been learning for years, they know a lot of chunks, but they still don't feel fluent. Is there something else holding them back, or is it just a matter of time?
Plateaus happen when learners stop challenging their brains. In 2012, a team at the University of Cambridge found that the biggest predictor of fluency wasn't time spent learning, it was variety of input. Learners who only practiced one type of material, like textbooks, hit plateaus faster than those who mixed it up with TV, podcasts, and conversations. The brain needs novelty to keep rewiring itself. That's why some people sound fluent after a year while others stagnate for decades.
That explains why I felt like I wasn't improving even though I was studying every day. I was just doing the same grammar exercises over and over. But how do we break out of a plateau? Is it really as simple as adding more variety, or is there something deeper going on?
Variety is part of it, but the deeper issue is attention. Most learners practice passively, they listen to a podcast while cooking or do flashcards while half asleep. But fluency requires active attention. In 2018, a study at the University of Maryland found that learners who engaged in deliberate practice, focusing intensely on a single skill for short bursts, improved 30% faster than those who practiced casually. The brain only rewires itself when it's fully engaged.
That's a game changer. So it's not just about how much time we spend, it's about how focused we are during that time. But what does deliberate practice look like for language learning? Is it just shadowing, or are there other techniques we should be using?
Shadowing is one technique, but there are others. One of the most effective is backchaining. You take a sentence, like "I don't know what you're talking about," and you start from the end. First, you say about. Then talking about. Then you're talking about. And so on, until you can say the whole sentence smoothly. This forces your brain to process the sentence as a single unit, not as separate words. It's like reverse engineering fluency.
Backchaining sounds intense, but I can see how it would train your brain to think in chunks. But what about people who are too shy to speak out loud? Is there a way to practice fluency silently, or do we just have to push through the discomfort?
You don't have to speak out loud to train fluency. In fact, one of the most powerful techniques is mental rehearsal. Athletes use this all the time, they visualize themselves performing a skill perfectly, and their brains actually strengthen the same neural pathways as if they were doing it for real. A 2020 study at the University of Barcelona found that language learners who mentally rehearsed conversations improved their fluency just as much as those who practiced out loud.
That's incredible. So even if someone is too nervous to speak, they can still train their brain by imagining conversations? But how does that work in practice? Do they just sit and daydream, or is there a specific way to do it?
It's more structured than daydreaming. You pick a scenario, like ordering food at a restaurant, and you visualize every detail: the menu, the waiter, your order. Then you mentally rehearse what you'd say, focusing on chunks like "I'll have the," or "could I get." The key is to make it as vivid as possible. The more real it feels, the more your brain treats it like actual practice. It's not a replacement for real conversation, but it's a great way to build confidence.
That makes so much sense. But what about people who feel like they're making progress but still don't sound fluent? They can hold conversations, but their accent or intonation gives them away. Is that just a matter of time, or is there a way to train that too?
Intonation is one of the most overlooked aspects of fluency. In 2014, a study at the University of Chicago found that listeners judge fluency more on rhythm and melody than on grammar or vocabulary. Native speakers don't just say words, they sing them. The good news is, you can train this too. One technique is singing along to English songs, not just for the words, but for the melody. Another is mirroring, watching a native speaker and copying their facial expressions and mouth movements. It sounds silly, but it works.
I've never thought about intonation as part of fluency, but it makes sense. If someone's rhythm is off, it's like they're speaking a different language, even if the words are correct. But how do we know if we're getting it right? Is there a way to measure our progress, or do we just have to trust our ears?
There are tools to measure it. Apps like Elsa Speak use AI to analyze your pronunciation and intonation, giving you instant feedback. But the best way is to record yourself and compare it to a native speaker. The goal isn't to sound exactly like them, it's to sound natural. Fluency isn't about perfection, it's about sounding like a person, not a robot. And here's the thing: most learners overestimate how perfect they need to be. Native speakers don't care if your grammar is flawless, they care if you sound confident and natural.
That's a huge relief. I think a lot of learners, myself included, get so hung up on sounding perfect that we end up sounding stiff. But if fluency is about sounding natural, not perfect, how do we shift our mindset? And what's the first step someone should take if they want to start rewiring their brain for fluency today?
The first step is to stop translating. From now on, every time you hear a phrase in English, try to absorb it as a single unit. Don't break it down, just let it sink in. The second step is to start shadowing. Pick a short audio clip, like a podcast or a YouTube video, and repeat after the speaker, matching their rhythm. Do this for just 5 minutes a day, and you'll start to feel the difference within a week. The third step is to embrace mistakes. Fluency isn't about avoiding errors, it's about communicating despite them. The more you speak, the more your brain will start to recognize patterns and fill in the gaps automatically.
That's such a practical starting point. But what about people who feel like they've tried everything and nothing works? Is there a deeper reason why some brains resist fluency, or is it just a matter of finding the right technique?
There's a deeper reason, and it's called interference. Your brain is wired to protect you from confusion, so when you learn a new language, your first language tries to take over. This is why Spanish speakers say, "I have 20 years" instead of "I am 20 years old." Their brain is defaulting to their native structure. The solution is to create a mental firewall between languages. One way to do this is to associate English with a specific time, place, or even a scent. For example, only study English in the morning with a cup of coffee. This trains your brain to switch into English mode automatically.
That's so interesting. I've never thought about using sensory cues to train my brain. But what about people who don't have a lot of time? Is there a way to hack fluency without spending hours a day? And how do we know if we're on the right track?
You don't need hours, you need focus. Even 10 minutes a day of deliberate practice can rewire your brain over time. The key is consistency. Think of it like going to the gym. You wouldn't expect to get fit by working out once a month, and you won't get fluent by studying sporadically. As for knowing if you're on the right track, here's a simple test. Can you understand a TV show without subtitles? If the answer is yes, you're on your way. If not, you need more input. Fluency isn't about speaking perfectly, it's about understanding effortlessly.
That's a great benchmark. But what about people who understand a lot but still can't speak? Is that just a matter of confidence, or is there something else going on?
It's not just confidence, it's output practice. Understanding and speaking are two different skills. Your brain can comprehend language long before it can produce it. This is called the silent period, and it's completely normal. The solution is to force yourself to speak, even if it's just to yourself. Start with simple phrases, like "today is," or "I feel," and build from there. The more you speak, the more your brain will start to connect the dots between what you understand and what you can say.
That's so encouraging. I think a lot of learners feel like they're failing because they can't speak yet, but you're saying it's just a natural part of the process. But what about people who feel like they're running out of time? Is there an age limit to fluency, or can anyone rewire their brain at any stage of life?
There's no age limit. In 2018, a study at MIT found that adults can achieve native-like fluency in a second language, but it takes longer than for children. The difference isn't ability, it's plasticity. Children's brains are more flexible, but adults have something children don't: strategy. An adult can learn a language in 6 months what might take a child 6 years, because they know how to learn. The key is to leverage your strengths, focus, discipline, and real-world experience. Fluency isn't about youth, it's about persistence.
That's the most hopeful thing I've heard all day. So what's the one thing someone should do today to start rewiring their brain for fluency? And how will they know when they've crossed the line from learner to fluent?
Do this today, pick one chunk, like "I don't know what you mean," and use it in 3 different conversations. Don't worry about perfect grammar, just focus on sounding natural. As for knowing when you're fluent, here's the test: when you stop translating in your head, when you dream in English, and when you forget you're speaking a second language, that's fluency. It's not about perfection, it's about effortlessness. And it's closer than you think.
That's such a clear action step. I think a lot of people overcomplicate language learning, but you're saying it's really about small, consistent actions. Before we wrap up, I have to ask, what's the biggest myth about fluency that you wish would die already?
The biggest myth is that fluency is about grammar. Grammar is the skeleton of a language, but fluency is the flesh and blood. You can have a perfect skeleton and still not be able to walk. Fluency is about movement, about using language to connect, to express, to live. The second biggest myth is that you need to live in an English-speaking country to become fluent. Immersion helps, but it's not enough. You can create your own immersion anywhere, as long as you're intentional about it. Fluency isn't a destination, it's a way of thinking.
That's such a powerful way to put it. Fluency as a way of thinking, not just a skill. I think that's going to stick with a lot of people. Before we go, what's one question you wish more learners would ask themselves about their fluency journey?
I wish more learners would ask, am I training my brain for fluency, or am I just memorizing words? Most people focus on what they know, not on how they use it. Fluency isn't about knowledge, it's about automaticity. The question to ask isn't, do I know this, but can I use this without thinking? If the answer is no, it's time to change your approach. And that's what this podcast is all about, helping you rewire your brain for real fluency.
That's such an important question to sit with. If you're listening to this and you're feeling inspired, don't just hit pause and forget about it, take action. Try shadowing for 5 minutes today, or pick one chunk and use it in a conversation. And if this episode helped you, do us a favor, smash that like button, subscribe for more deep dives into how the brain learns English, and share this with someone who's stuck in intermediate purgatory. We'll see you next week.
And remember, fluency isn't about sounding perfect, it's about sounding like you. Your voice matters, and the world needs to hear it. Keep going, and we'll see you in the next episode. Peace out.